it. So I should know all the answers, but no, we do really want to hear from you. So how's it changing? So context, so we've always worked historically in 5-year strategies at the BFI. I joined just before the last, which was quite a significant shift in what we did with our lottery funding, because we were still relatively new in being a lottery distributor at that point. So obviously it was the UK Film Council before. So this is, it's obviously an evolution as we've grown into the role of being a national lottery distributor. The key difference this time is that it's part of a 10-year strategy. So this is Screen Culture 2033, and that's because in 2033, it's not just so that we all secure our jobs for another 10 years, it's so that we lead up to the centenary of the BFI, which is in 2033. And it will continue to evolve. It's not written in stone. That's the key point that we're trying to take away from it, is that it needs to evolve as the industry continues to evolve as well. So on that, it's very, very flexible. There's a lot of it as well. Sorry, can none of you hear me? So it's very flexible. And there's, as I say, there's there's going to be a lot of funds that will be slowly kind of released over the next year, post-April. But it sits within a much larger strategy, which is Screen Culture. So lottery before isn't, as before, it was always a distinct component of the BFI, but now it's really embedded. So for example, like me and the audiences team, we're part of the program and audiences at large. We've got a new leadership team at the BFI. We've got a new culture that we're all working under, and we're embedded much more fully across our distribution colleagues, our exhibition colleagues in programming, our the film festivals, the venues. Like, we're not operating our own audience development funding initiatives in a vacuum. We're all kind of critical friends to each other and are actually embedded within the cultural infrastructure of the BFI much more fully. In terms of because in terms of what you're all interested or not, but we could get really detailed in terms of what our funds actually are distinctly within the audiences, but I don't know, we've not got that much time, so maybe not. But in terms of audience funding, the big shift, there's kind of 3 components. I was really pleased to see how well our funds landed, both internally as we were developing them, and then obviously externally so far as well, because they're hard fought. Everything is hard fought at the BFI. It's really, we all work together. We had a massive public consultation. We had a huge industry consultation. There was a moment internally where it probably started to shift to be a bit more Game of Thrones, when we were all kind of fighting for our own specific areas, and really having to develop significant business plans about why audiences are the fundamental. And on that note, I think it's worth saying, with all of our funds, it is about audiences. That is the fundamental. That's what we're really trying to get to now. So the methods of how we get there, that's what will continue to evolve. But in terms of in terms of the funds themselves, they're all connected, and the point of the end goal is to genuinely enhance the cultural lives of audiences across the UK. These funds are more profoundly than ever as interested in the cultural outcomes as the social ones. So we've got 3 funds. The Film Audience Network continues, and that continues at the same level that it has done before, which is a huge boost for all of us, I think, and a really kind of trying not to say reward, but it's a real confirmation of the incredible work that the network has done and that it's grown into as well. So that is continuing with some new areas. The Audience Project Fund is probably, again, that's an evolution of the Audience Fund. So although it keeps the component of the output is the audiences, it's not necessarily about the distribution sector or the film festival sector. It is about the audiences. Obviously, we're interested in all of that, but it's now down to the applicants, to the industry around us, to tell us who are the audience priorities. Whereas before, it was we were quite prescriptive, because the objectives and the aims of the fund was based on the data and the deficits of who we knew weren't connected with lottery funding and hadn't been historically. And surprise, surprise, it was all those demographics that have protected characteristics under the Equalities Act. But we've made huge gains in that area, so now we can be much more robust in who are the deficits in your organisations that you that you need to help and grow in order for them to benefit and for your organisations and businesses to benefit as well. So there is still that kind of industrial backbone to everything that we're doing, but the fundamental is really now to enhance audience opportunities. It is all across the UK. We are really not particularly interested in London and the South East because stuff happens there through virtue of osmosis, whereas it's very hard to get things happening all across the UK, and that's what we're here to really help with. And the third is a kind of, I shouldn't really say this, but like advice I got, because it was really stressful doing this, because like we've all had like a busy few years, and we're still administering the Cultural Recovery Fund and just lots of other kind of new projects, just kind of as we all did during the pandemic, we just kind of probably said yes to too much stuff, and there was just loads of work and loads of stuff to do, and then suddenly we had to write the National Lottery Strategy as well, and I was really feeling the pressure of that. And I had some advice that was probably quite bad in hindsight. That was like, why don't you just like pretend like you got, like imagine if you just went to the pub and got drunk and wrote down all the ideas, and then next morning take a look at them and see which might stick. And that was the kind of process I went through on this open cinemas strategy, which is where we will kind of take direct audience development action and literally buy out cinemas around the country and buy out a film and put it on for free. Because then you've got, one, it helps us build on the relationships that we've made through the Cultural Recovery Fund, all these independent cinemas, and actually try to get new audiences into those cinemas and certainly to watch things that they wouldn't necessarily watch as well. So that's this new component that is actually like direct audience benefit in the most kind of social way of just offering a film for free, giving people the opportunity to do that and to get new people into all of the venues, which will turn into sustained audiences and customers for you all. So those are like the three areas from mine. There is plenty of other stuff that is going to happen to give opportunity to businesses, to industry, to just to the sector in general. We want to be much more open with our research and statistics. We collect a huge amount of stuff. We need to find a digestible way to get it out there and to make sure that it actually responds to what you're interested in. That will genuinely help you to evolve and develop your own practices. Same with the skills strategy as well, to ensure that business and governance, which we know there were huge deficits in during the pandemic, that that's something that we can offer. And also obviously in terms of what I think we're going to come on to, the idea of new forms as well, like new forms of screen culture and new opportunities to engage with different types of screen culture within an infrastructure that we are quite comfortable with and know how does that actually work, and how do we connect those dots. So we're really trying to embed ourselves across, as much as we can with the lottery funding we've got. But as I say, we're also not operating in a vacuum, because we're, directly delivering cultural activity ourselves. So we do know the challenges.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the rationale for screen culture, expanding beyond film into immersive virtual reality and games. So, sorry, I'm just...
Don't say it like that. We're in Dundee. We're in like the home of games.
I know. I'm just curious, because I've never played a video game, so I'm just curious. And I know it's something that you're looking certainly in the first couple of years, it's around research and development, because you're not quite sure yourselves about where that's going to go. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's so funny how everyone kind of approaches the games thing with that kind of games, what you're doing with games, where actually what we say about games is we don't really know what we're doing with games. So we might not do anything. We're going to spend the next few years working out, what is our role. I mean, we're very connected on the industrial side. Like we have, advisory groups and steering groups, and, they're very much plugged in like board members and so on. But we're not there on a funding intervention yet, because what would that be? What does that need to be? And we'll spend the next few years, the next 3 years, working that out, report back before we make any kind of heavy-handed intervention, because we're not convinced. What we are convinced that there needs to be is some kind of industrial leadership in the same way that we bring to what we know as traditional film or elsewhere. But it's not something to be scared of. Don't worry. I mean, it all goes back to this point of a creative. one, we're firmly of the belief that film is still an evolving form, and storytelling, obviously with the advancements in tech and so on, storytelling can take a whole different, way of reaching audiences to what we've all, well, I don't want to speak for everyone, but, for me, like traditionally are aware of, and there's a traditional economy of film that, we've always operated around, but we don't want to think that there's only that one way, because it's unfair on audiences, it's unfair on advancements in that traditional economy, but it's also really unfair on creatives, because, when, storytelling, it doesn't just have to be one way. You think about your daily lives now of how you consume, and you can get a huge amount of, you can still get pathos, you can still have impact from, short form, however it's delivered to you. We are, and it's also, frankly, like a reflection of what we're actually doing and have been for a long time. So it's just really being much more clear about that up front. I mean, in terms of like the outputs of my team over the last year, we've been main partner on the Story Trails project, which Story Futures led on, and you'll be seeing some of the VR work. We've commissioned and exhibited In Pursuit of Repetitive Beats with Coventry City of Culture, which is a huge VR social documentary on 1990s Coventry rave culture, and it's just winning awards all around the world now, and is having sellout runs at LFF and elsewhere. Like there's a BBC season on Sunday nights at the moment that came out of our department, and all those films play for free on video on demand as well. Like the outputs of what we're doing are reaching audiences in a huge amount of ways already. So it's not actually that dramatic a shift. It's just about making it much more clear of the interest, because otherwise we run the risk of just like everyone just thinking that we only do one thing, which we absolutely don't. So that's unfair on kind of us, but as I say, like it's unfair on the advancement and the opportunity for audiences. So just going to bring it in, but not going to go nuts. I'm
going to ask for a show of hands. Does anybody do virtual reality or games or immersive stuff?
There you go.
Right. No, it's interesting just to see. Thank you. So I'm going to ask, what role can and will the BFI play in supporting cinemas at risk due to an ongoing number of factors, post-pandemic recovery, cost of living crisis? I could name as many things. Brexit. No, I won't mention Brexit, because I'll just,
you already
for
have.
those who know me, I'll just go off on one, and that's not a good look.
Yeah, I mean, so what role can we play?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so as you say, like, we're aware of everything that's facing the sector. Like, there's a huge list that's growing of things. So, we have been for a long time feeding that back to government and advocating for the potential need of ongoing kind of support, but it's very hard to work out what that would be right now because of all those factors. It gets a little bit existential because obviously in COVID, there was one issue that we were all facing, and we could, build a case and make sure that cinemas were in the Cultural Recovery Fund and then its equivalents around, around the UK. But, we'd never had a role like that before, like in terms of, our relationships with independent cinemas around the country and being as kind of blanket, kind of, here's the support that you will need and are looking for right now. Before the pandemic, the cinemas would, the market would ebb and flow, some businesses would close, and we didn't have a role in that. But now there is this, what is our role? And it's to continue to be that champion for the sector, to absolutely celebrate independent cinema. It's still, absolutely clear all the way through our strategy that, they're a bedrock of, it's what the whole economy kind of orbits around. But, in terms of that direct support, that I think there's potentially an expectation for us to have now post COVID. We don't have that, and I hope that we can offer more support. But really, our role is to champion, to advocate, to engage those conversations. Like, we speak regularly to cinemas, we hear what those issues are, we You know, we feed them back, we consider them ourselves, like, is there any, because, you know, I hope everyone understands now that, I mean, because even before the Cultural Recovery Fund, you know, we looked at what we had when it was clear that this was a crisis and, you know, restructured all of our funding to just like make sure that everybody could survive in those early months before something bigger could come. So I hope everyone understands that, like, we really do care and we'll do what we need to do in order to keep things going. But as you say, like, there is just a huge amount at the moment facing that, you know, one thing and one amount of money isn't necessarily going to solve. You know, it's something that we've all got to solve together. And we're all going to make, you know, I think really, if things continue to get bad, you know, have to make really difficult decisions. But, you know, make sure that we're all offering that support to each other, make sure we're all talking to each other and find those ways. I mean, there's a huge policy role in this for us as well, because it's not necessarily funding, because if this is a long-term issue, this turns into much more kind of bigger interventions around things like, you know, like, because, yeah, I know you don't want to talk about Brexit, but with Brexit come these supposed Brexit freedoms. So what are they? Can we actually like look at some of those things that were holding us back in the past? Like, is that the moment to kind of lift certain taxes, or to, you know, look at those look at what that framework was holding us back before? So all those conversations, all those thoughts, all that modelling is constantly kind of going on internally. But, you know, we're very clear that, you know, I'm very aware, like post-COVID, that it's like, oh no, we've got this much bigger role now, and there's this much greater expectation of us, and we've got to be clear on how we can deliver on that.
I suppose that's to your credit, in the sense that you did support so many venues through the pandemic. I mean, is there anything that we can collectively do to, you know, speak to or influence the government?
Yeah, I mean, you can always do that. I mean, it's, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I mean, it's really helpful for it not just to always be us, because, like, you know, we've obviously got a close relationship with them, and it's just, if it's the BFI continuously going on about, you know, problems again, then, you know, I don't know how much that will land. But if they're collectively, if there genuinely are problems that can be shared, and that they can hear it from other voices, then yeah, that's really powerful.
I don't think the UK government particularly, I will not go down the Tories route, but particularly understands that cultural activity and cinemas are really, really important around people's well-being, good mental health. I think those things really need to be driven through, and we need to constantly do that. I'm going to see if there's any questions from the audience, because I don't want to witter on.
There is, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
It's not working.
I'll use my big voice. Oh, there we go. We're on. Yeah, we've got a few questions, so we'll try and work through as many as we can. So one is the BFI planning to develop a capital programme to support UK exhibitors?
Is that for me or for Alison?
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are, coming from Alison. I think that's for you, Ben.
There you go.
Ben?
Look, you know, I mean, right now, you know, the answer is, like, do we have any capital funding? No, you know, and we can't use national lottery funding for capital. We can't use national lottery funding for structural core funding either. We've never been able to do that in the funding that we get, because the amount is modest. But, you know, after COVID, I'm like, maybe nothing's off the table anymore. Like, if there really is that kind of capital need, because, you know, coming out of austerity now, you know, we know that the first thing that was cut during those austerity years was that capital infrastructure. So we can't continue to see larger cuts in spending that will, you know, that won't reinvest into capital infrastructure, because we've had, you know, best part of 15 years now of no investment in those areas, which is why schools and hospitals and so on need to have that investment, which they will get now. But, you know, the cultural sector is no different. So I hope that, you know, as I say, like, we've just come out of unprecedented times. I say we've just come out of it. Maybe we haven't. Maybe we're still in unprecedented times. But, you know, always needs to be against a robust case of, like, well, why? Like, what's the need? And are there any other opportunities for funding at this point?
And is there a way to perhaps filter that through making our buildings more green, for example, because there is a climate crisis on, so how can we access that funding, for example?
Yeah, completely. I mean, that's one thing I should say in terms of our screen culture strategy. There are three pillars that run across everything, you know, across our corporate side, across audiences, across our funding, you know, equity, diversity and inclusion, UK-wide, and environmental sustainability. So, you know, what we're going to spend the first year doing on all the awards that we make is we're going to calculate with a partner what is the environmental footprint of the sector, because we don't know at the moment. And then we can start to look at how can we decrease that over the funding period and over the strategy period. And capital is one of those, because right now, you know, when we look at how are you going to reduce it, like if you've got single pane windows, if you've got, you know, big drafty corridors, if like whatever, like, you know, it's capital is key and crucial to it. So, good point.
Okay, moving on.
Are there goals within the strategy to improve the level of accessibility to cinemas for deaf and hard of hearing audiences?
Yes. So the Audience Project Fund itself, I mean, originally it was snappily called the Audience Access and Participation Fund, but that didn't get through my marketing team. So it's the Audience Projects Fund. But like the whole focus of it is access. You know, we're talking about who are the deficits in your audiences, and I think it's pretty clear, you know, like deaf and disabled would be right at the top of the list. So, you know, in terms of improving access, that's exactly what that fund is designed to do, and to allow and to really boost that and to make sure. And we've got some really ambitious targets that we've set ourselves. I think everyone's reading them and like thinking that they're for each individual project to respond to, but they're for the fund overall to respond to. So they're our targets. And in terms of, you know, amount of accessible screenings and events, I think we've put it at, I mean, we put it over 50% is what we're talking about. Like, we do want to see, like, this is the time for a, you know, a real sea change in what the provision is out there.
Okay. It's great to see family and children being considered as a priority audience now. How do you see that playing out under the new strategy?
It's interesting. That's how it's been interpreted. You know, it's always, as I say, the audiences are going to be what are your needs based on the deficits within, you know, your audiences currently. What areas do you want to grow and focus? So it could be children and families. Why we have mentioned film and children is because in terms of like the overall objective of what we're trying to achieve is that we want everyone at every stage of their life to have a relationship and an opportunity to engage with film and with cinema and with screen culture. But you obviously have to start somewhere. So that's why family and children are there, to make sure that there is a starting point for that journey to take place. So, you know, that it's obviously then slightly ambiguous on, is that what you want to do? But it's something that we're very aware that, you know, if we do want to be as bold and as kind of noisy at that level of like, we want everyone to engage, then you're going to have to start somewhere. But that's not to say that you need to do it, because, you know, as the previous presentation shows, like there's already amazing stuff happening in venues for those audiences. So it's, you know, it's more, again, like it's a challenge to us in terms of what are we doing overall at the BFI. But yeah, I know it's got people quite pleased to see it in there.
Yeah, absolutely. How concerned is the BFI with post-COVID exhibition staff burnout and mental health crisis?
That's a big one. Concerned as a person with post-COVID stress burnout.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone in this room would put themselves in that category, really. I mean, you know, yeah, we're completely mindful of it because, you know, as I keep saying, we're not operating in a vacuum. Like we didn't all go on holiday for the past few years. We've been living this as well in a really dramatic way. So we're completely aware of it. We want to see staff looked after. We want to see organisations, as I talked about, you know, in terms of governance and business. That's not just, you know, raising investment and, you know, your budgets. That's like doing the job of a manager and actually looking after your staff and doing that appropriately. So we do need to see that governance in bed, and we need to lead by example of that. So yeah, you know, it's huge. I think and again, you know, I've mentioned like social a few times. A lot of the stuff that is starting to kind of come at us in terms of what are you doing about this, what are you doing about that, and so on. They're societal matters. So again, they're not necessarily something that we're going to be able to fix in a funding strategy. Again, a lot of that's going to come through the strength of networks and working out, what is the best way to manage that based on what's working across the sector and so on. But no, we're hugely mindful of it.
Coming back to games and immersive, why is the BFI chasing AR, VR, which are prohibitively expensive ventures for organisations and venues, rather than declining audiences and upgrading basic tech?
I guess a challenge whether it is actually binary. When we're talking about, if you're saying declining audiences, but then you've got an opportunity for new audiences through, a new and different screen culture, then that's actually that's the opportunity rather than it being a threat or a drain. We're hoping to see, we're hoping to lead a partnership on actually investment on the capital side into cinemas so that they can, cultural centres, so that they can, embed it into their programmes much more so. But can you repeat it? It was quite an angry question, wasn't it?
I'm reading it more as the redirection of funds. So if funds are being redirected to AR, VR, and actually cinemas need them for support.
I don't think funds have been redirected. We've got no portion of funds that we're saying, right, we're going to spend X amount on this or X amount on that. It's all going to come down to the strength of application. We're just letting you know what we're interested in and what we're mindful of. So there's not going to be less for this or less for that. It's, there's going to be funding for the best stuff out there.
We've got 10 minutes. Can I keep going, Alison?
Yes,
We've got quite a few.
Yes, I want to hear your questions. I've got questions, but let's take from the audience.
Great. How should we collectively lobby government and political parties? Do we need to start buying spaces at their party conferences to advocate for screen culture?
Yes.
That's a good idea.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I don't think I'm allowed to suggest that you all lobby. But I guess the question is the challenge back is, because I get this a lot at the moment, what isn't happening? What do you want to see? That isn't, why do you feel like you need to go and lobby government? Because we're coming out of a period when, we've just seen the greatest single investment into culture that we've ever seen, in the Culture Recovery Fund, 1.8 billion. And yes, it was an unprecedented time, but, that did go into capital upgrades, that did go into, organisational, operational budgets. That was just, I've never seen anything like that before, ever. So this idea of, does the government care or not? I think you have to err on well, yes, because no one else got that targeted intervention. There was a blanket kind of furlough scheme, but in terms of, the hotel industry, the tourism industry, they didn't get it. There wasn't an intervention like that. Culture got that. So, there's clearly, you have to err on the side of right, they understand the importance of culture. They understand the need to invest in it, which they have done so. And that kind of, to me, is the doors open then. So that's why I keep going in, being what about this? What about that? We've got to keep going, keep building. But in terms of that specific challenge, it's that's our job. We're constantly kind of fighting for the sector, and that's no different kind of post-COVID than it was pre-COVID. But I'm glad that it kind of happened in we were clearly respected, and that paid off in the most dramatic way possible by getting that targeted intervention. So I wouldn't rule out that, they're certainly listening.
I think we just want to collectively help you. You give you good examples. I think that we want to help you build that case. I think it's not a case of, I think we can also, we've got people from Wales here, we've got, we're in Scotland. How do we get our national governments also to make that case to the UK government? We have to do our bit as well. I certainly feel that way. So.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. They're flying in. We're trying to keep up with them, but we won't be able to cover them all. Alison, maybe this one is a good one to think of with your fan hat on. With cost of living crisis and funds tight, how will FAN ensure cinemas are still able to be accessible and inclusive for audiences?
It's difficult because there's a big balancing act at the moment, and one of the problems and one of the things that I do say to my team is we can't do more for less. We can't take on new projects. We have to protect what we're already doing. We have to look after staff in terms of giving them fair pay, for example. So I think all those things are very difficult, but obviously there's not the same level of income coming in to most venues, I would say. I think we at Glasgow Film are very lucky because our cinema is doing very, very well, but even normality, and that means 1920 levels of income, our expenditure, our income is going back to there, but our expenditure is there. So expenditure, things that we have no control over, are going up, and that is going to be a huge problem for many, many venues. So I think it is a difficult way to balance that. But I don't think you should forget those core things that you're doing around accessibility, looking after those audiences that we've cultivated over many years around deaf and deafened, for example, movie memories around people with dementia. So I think it's just, you just sometimes have to prioritise, and that's tough. I think everybody in the room will be having that.
Yeah, absolutely. How is Screen Strategy 33 seeking to encourage employment in terms of permanent, semi-permanent or freelance, especially as many, regardless of experience, struggle?
So, you know, we're very clear what we expect in terms of, you know, best practice from employers. You know, I don't want to, I've really got to try to make sure and be clear on like what is within the limits of the BFI to do, because, you know, it's not for me to be intervening in like individual contracts or between, you know, someone who we might fund for a short-term project or not. All we can do is bestow that best practice in terms of, you know, what we would expect, because ultimately they're not beholden to us, you know, but, you know, very mindful that people need to be looked after.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ben. There's a couple that are linked here, so I'm going to try and join them together around the Open Cinema Scheme. So there's one that says, can you comment on who will choose the films or cinemas for the Open Cinema Scheme? And then the second is, what outcomes do you want from that scheme? And why do you take a metrocentric view that price is the barrier for audiences to see independent film?
Okay, so who will choose them? So we're going to, the way that it's going to be run is that we're, once I've written the guidelines, God, I need to get some time in my diary. We're going to invite applications for it to be run independently of us. So it will be a third party who will run it, and it will be down to them to work out what is the model for, you know, I mean, I hope I might, or the BFI might have a seat at the table, but it's not going to be us. It's going to be a steering group, an advisory group, an industry cross section who will decide how those films will be selected. Was that the extent of the first part of the question? Yeah. And then the metrocentric view, I mean, I don't think I'd challenge that. I don't think it is metrocentric. I mean, part of that data that we want to start sharing, you know, just last week we've had we do a wave study of nationally represented audiences. Did 4,000 people who are representative of the UK population across age and demographics, and you know, we asked them an ad hoc question of what stops you going to the cinema more, and number one, without question, was, like, COVID's way down the list now. It was about the increase in costs distinct to a cinema ticket, but alongside that, you know, obviously everyone's worried about the cost of living and having less available money, having less available time, and, you know, the opportunities that they've got in their own homes as well. So, you know, it's not a metrocentric view. This is absolutely like a UK-wide, you know, a UK-wide set of data, and we need to respond to it. And, you know, we can't just assume that everyone who goes to the cinema are the only people who want to go to the cinema. There are plenty of people who have numerous barriers. I mean, again, in that ad hoc that we asked them, like, the amount of times disability comes up in terms of what stops you going. You know, we really need to try to ensure that those screenings are as accessible as possible, that they are as open as possible, and removing the price, you know, which unanimously is said is the highest barrier, should make huge gains in terms of just giving the opportunity to different people to come into those venues, experience them and enjoy them in the same way that lots of established audiences do. It is not about giving developed audiences a free cinema ticket. It is about offering a new opportunity to people who don't have it currently.
Got time for one more?
Did you?
One more or one more?
No, one more for the audience.
Okay. Do project funds undermine the idea of a long-term strategy? How will BFI support venues to ensure that we are able to follow through with project work?
No. One of the reasons why we don't do organisational funding anymore is because we weren't ever really allowed to do it. Like, we're not allowed to do that with National Lottery funding. It's always project work. I think the counter to that is that, the long-term view is that, well, the funding isn't going anywhere. We're certainly going to be here. It's a 10-year strategy, so that we're ensuring that, obviously, that everyone can take that long-term view to achieve it. But also with the kind of most utopian version of this is that, you might not always need that funding either, because if, who knows what a different year we might be in, next year or in 2026 or whenever, that there hopefully would be a point where that project funding isn't needed anymore because the audiences are established, you've grown the business. So then there's, the idea of like locking into, a constant long-term project means that you're always going to find a way to spend the money, but we have to be that critical friend. We have to give that counter always, because ultimately it's public funding and it's national lottery, and we need to ensure that we can do as much as we can with it, rather than just the same projects for years and years and years. And we've set a very challenging target about the amount of new applicants for the fund, because we do want to see new applicants for the fund. We do want to, ensure that the industry continues to evolve, and isn't just like a small discrete number of people who can only ever access this funding. This is absolutely like to ensure that we all keep learning and keep pushing from it as well. So, although the funding will always be there, let's hope that not everyone always needs it. And that's the point of project funding, because if we did just give out, long-term organisational funding, only a very few amount of people would benefit from that ultimately.
I think on that note, the session's come to an end, so thank you very much to the audience. And thank you to Ben.
Thank you to Alison.
Thank you, Ben and Alison, for taking so many questions. Thank you for using Slido. We nailed it. Look at that. We only have a really quick 5-minute comfort break just while we set up for the next session. So if anybody does need to nip out, we will be starting back in 5 minutes.